Excellent. So, going to get into the discussion today on the themes of today's episode. And this is part 1, folks. We will definitely have a part 2 that I really hope Jess comes back for.
Please.
We'll see how today goes.
If you invite me, yes. Okay. This is like my audition? Okay.
And folks, tell us in the social media how she does. So the first woman up for discussion is Veruca, the female werewolf.
I step out of my skin.
You know what I am.
You wouldn't know me now.
You've known since the first time you saw me.
Couldn't you go away?
Right before sunset, I get a little buzzed, you know?
Come here.
I'm not getting in that stupid cage with you if that's what this is all about. We belong outside.
You can't run loose tonight. And not just because you might hurt somebody. I know people that'll be out there hunting for us.
So you're saying I should spend the whole night with you, alone, locked in a cage?
And folks, there are a couple of women that we're going to talk about today that I wrote some blog posts on our website. So a little bit of the discussion will be related to those two. So I'm going to throw a question out to you two, Jess and Gina. First, what were your first impressions of Veruca?
Well, when I very first watched the series, I was of the majority of people who were like, I don't like Veruca. She broke up Oz and Willow. You know, she kind of got in there and was kind of like, you know, very upfront about it, and too like that she knew, she made it aware. Sorry, pardon me. She made it very clear what her intentions were, regardless of what people were feeling. So I just remember at the beginning not liking her. And it wasn't really, Kelly, until you like started talking about Veruca and I was helping you with your blog posts and stuff like that, that I was like, oh, seeing Veruca in a very different light and how, you know, and how she was treated. And then how typically how monstrous women are treated by the Scoobies throughout the series.
Right. Thank you. And so as we know, Veruca has, kind of the exact opposite thoughts and feelings about being a werewolf. She is, you know, she kind of takes it to, unfortunately, a very dark place. But I feel like she kind of owns it. She understands that, you know, I am a werewolf. I have all of this extra power. And, you know, just a thought now, but I would wonder if Veruca would be have such a presence if she wasn't a werewolf. But I have a feeling there's probably, I mean, she's only the wolf, as we know, you know, 3 days out of the month, or are we all the time? We'll get to that later. But, you know, I think she just has that allure, and we see that in that, I think one of the first episodes of her, she's singing in her band Shy. At the Bronze, we have Giles, Oz, and Xander just taken aback and just kind of in awe. She kind of exudes this primal feminine energy that those men kind of just really fell for. And for me, I just feel like Veruca, and I talk about that in the blog post, but she just embodies like absolute just like power, agency, femininity. And she's also very overtly sexual and very aggressive in that way, which is very opposite of Willow. And we see Willow, you know, feeling very insecure of this. And like I talk about in my blog post, it's women, like Jess mentioned, in Sunnydale, when you kind of look back, like take a step back and look at everything, if you are outside of the norm, then you don't belong. You are not going to be accepted. You are other, you know, you have to be put down, so to speak. What are all your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Like your blog post definitely also opened up my eyes to a whole other side of Veruca that I didn't really think about at first thought. What I liked about it, and maybe it's just because like it was my experience personally in high school, is that like I was very much like Willow when it came to relationships. Mm-hmm. So of course, like, okay, this is like TMI, but ex-boyfriends of mine have cheated on me with women that, you know, were a lot more like sexual than me. And so I find it really realistic. But I could also understand if you didn't have that viewpoint when you were in high school. It does seem like Veruca is obviously made out to seem like the bad guy or a bad character because she's overly sexual. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's really interesting. And that's one of my favorite things about art is that everyone can see it differently depending on what they've been through in life. And yeah, I don't know.
And I think that's why, like, when I first watched those episodes with Veruca, I identified with Willow because I was like, that's me. Like, whenever another woman comes around, I instantly feel insecure and feel threatened, and that my partner is going to like that person more because they look more confident and they're more, you know, confident in who they are and their sexuality, and they, you know, and men could be attracted to that, right? And so I remember watching that and feeling very, you know, almost like I feel threatened for Willow. But at the same time, too, though, just you like looking at the other side of it, it's like, well, Veruca just may look confident, but she may not necessarily be confident. That's just how she is dealing with things in the world, and how, you know, and that sometimes that's that element of when women turn against women, right? Because like, oh, well, I feel insecure. Well, just because she's acting very confident does not mean that she feels that confident. That's just how she survives and goes and gets through the world as well. And so that's where, like, when reading Kelly's blog post and rethinking about the character of Veruca again, I was like, okay, so yes, so she may be owning her sexuality and stuff like that, but she's also like, she was changed into a werewolf. That there's a sense of comfort or confidence that is a bit shaken by that, because you don't know really where you belong in the world.
That's a really wonderful point. And I have to say, when I first watch it, I don't identify with Willow in that case. Maybe I'm the Veruca. Probably am. I think about me going on to first dates and, you know, having a beer and a shot and showing a lot of skin and men being very intimidated. Like, who is this woman that is asking me to kiss her? And just like, I'm very forthright in my
the total opposite of me. 8 hours later you get a kiss.
You know, and I read this really wonderful, I'm kind of obsessed with it now, and Gina, you might be into it, I should send it to you, but it's called Hairy Thuggish Women, Female Werewolves, Gender, and the Hoped For Monster by Elizabeth Clark. I'm trying to seek this woman out because I just really loved her analysis and like kind of research into female werewolves overall.
Yeah,
that's
that's really
really
cool.
neat. Yeah, it talks about like queer monsters, and there's even like a whole queer element to it that I didn't necessarily want to get into here, but it's really fantastic. But she does make a point of, you know, Veruca's as an example of an unlivable monster. She's an unlivable woman. And, you know, she doesn't adhere to our proper codes of femininity and being a woman. Also, a portion of that is because she's a werewolf. You know, traditionally a male kind of dominated role, but she also, because of being a werewolf, portrays a lot of masculine traits. We get very furry and hairy, aggressive, we're violent, you know, we're very just vulgar, and, you know, she kind of takes that onto herself, and she gets power out of that. But obviously that's not how a woman should be. So in the Sunnydale universe, you got to be put down, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. You need to be wearing pastels and live in suburbia.
Yes. Yep.
And it's interesting too, because is she just seen as a villain because it's different than Willow? You know, I don't know if it was, and again, I could be so wrong, but I don't know if it was the writer's intention to make Veruca seem like a villain just because of her traits. I personally feel like she's just a villain because she's the opposite of Willow. Like, if we had a main character that was Veruca, Willow would be the villain. So it's interesting. It could have been the writer's intention to make her a villain, or it could just be because it's like, you know, the opposite of Willow.
I also think it's interesting too that here we are, like, we're talking about how Veruca comes in and she breaks up Oz and Willow, but at the same time you're like, whoa. We're forgetting about the agency of Oz. He is just as much as has the ability to decide what he wants to do or not. And so, you know, he was just as responsible for his actions as Veruca was for her. And I always think it's interesting that we always tend to forget that sometimes when it comes to these type of situations, when like someone else comes into the picture and like, you know, a partner leaves and stuff like that. And we're like, oh my God, the other woman is because she did this and this. Is like, he was just as responsible for his actions as well too. So
yeah, totally.
As they say, it takes two to tango.
Exactly. Yeah.
It takes two to wolf out and bag. It's very true. He did not act accordingly, nor was he honest with himself or what was going on there. You know, and that actually was a great point, Jess, because it reminds me of when Willow comes in to meet him in the, like, get him breakfast and coffee that next morning, and he said, I had no choice. It's like, yes, you did. You could have told someone, but you locked her in a cage with you. And then Veruca says, girl's got a point. And I was like, yes.
Willow.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
I know what you saw. It wasn't... I had to lock her in there with me.
I bet.
She's like me, a wolf.
Well, I knew you two had a lot in common, but... Don't touch me!
She was gonna hurt somebody. I didn't have a choice.
But you did. If you could have told somebody. Your solution? Just put you two together in a room all night? Girl's got a point.
Leave.
I'm just saying.
Now! I'm sorry.
I knew, you jerk. And you sat there and you told me everything was fine?
But you thought with something that was not your brain, and look what happened.
Oh boy! Right? And so when we all we don't turn against Oz, right?
No.
Like people are upset that he breaks up with Willow and he leaves, and we're like, oh wow, but when I was doing Google searches, like just to see like what do people say about Veruca, and everyone is angry about her, and they were happy that she dies and departs because she broke up Willow and Oz, and it's
God.
Okay, that's very unfair.
Yeah,
it's totally
that's a really
unfair.
good point.
It's totally unfair. And also, look at her. She's such a slut, let's say. And, she's done this, but it takes, it was definitely his doing. She didn't really, I think, at first initiate everything. They found each other as werewolves out and about.
Yeah.
And it happened. So I had a question is, and I brought it up in the blog post as well, is like, why didn't she become an ally instead of being a villain? I mean, it would have been really great to have another werewolf character and just learn more about it. I mean, she has an interesting kind of ideology behind it. Of course, it's very exaggerated. And, she thinks it's totally fine to kill to get what you want. But, it would have been very beneficial to the Scoobies to have another werewolf around.